Audiobooks Express presents The Lobo Locksmith, written by Cliff Howe, narrated by Adam West.
The Lobo Locksmith. The brassy Arizona sun gleamed on the steel handcuffs that mantled the small, lean man's wrists. It made deep black shadows within his empty holsters. Time and again he turned his thin, gaunt face to glance anxiously back over the surging haunches of his sorrel, as if to catch a glimpse of his pursuers in the hazy, wavering distance of the cholla and cacti-studded plain. Before him, and within a mile, rose the brushy, carpeted foothills. Deep, sharp-sided gullies slotted twistingly into them. Within their bewildering maze, a posse could make a fruitless search for days. As the sorrel clattered into the quiet coolness of the ravine, the lean rider's furtive eyes darted right and left. Pinyon pine and mountain cedar blocked his searching gaze. A mountain jay fluttered past his shoulder, caused him to jerk his head in that direction. Every crash of the sorrel's hoofs on the stony bed of the coulee seemed to jar him into more rigid tenseness, to sharpen his wariness. Clattering around a sharp bend in the gully, the small man suddenly brought the sorrel to an abrupt halt. To the right, about 50 yards ahead, stood a rock shanty. With its single glassless window and heavy closed door, it stood compact and lonely in a rather large clearing 100 feet up the slope. A dozen steps to one side of it was a wooden bucket and a tiny grassy pocket from which a sun-silvered trickle of water corkscrewed down the slope among the rocks. The rider shot a quick, anxious glance over his shoulder, as if he had caught sounds of pursuit down the gully. Then his cunning eyes narrowed contemplatively on the bucket and the spring beside it. The thin fugitive shrugged his shoulders, tickled the sorrel with his gut hooks, and rode up the slope. Dismounting beside the spring, he kneeled beside the grass-girdled pocket of cool water and thrust both hands into it above the wrists. The thick door of the shanty stirred, open an inch. The creaking of it caused the lean man hunkered above the spring to stiffen, then tighten his thin lips. "Stay as you are, or I'll kill you." The hunched figure at the spring froze into statuesque immobility. His man's-old wrists remained in the cool water. His furtive eyes, which seemed fascinated with the bubbling spring, remained fixed, unblinking. "Maybe I'll kill you anyway." The voice of the figure standing spraddle-legged in the open doorway was similar to his sinister appearance. Coarse, rough, vicious. Tiny, glittering eyes stabbed out from cavernous sockets on either side of a flat, broken nose. Sunlight put stripes of fire into his bright red hair, glinted on the heavy Colt clutched in his thick, knob-knuckled fist. The thin fugitive at the spring remained like a statue carved from granite. Not a muscle twitched as the occupant of the shanty crunched across the gravelly slope and towered above his stooped figure. "I ain't liking strange hombres to wash their dirty paws in my spring," growled the one with the gun. "Who in hell do you figure you are anyway?" The lean one with his wrists in the water twisted his head, peered appealingly into the hard, vicious features above him. Then he lifted his hands from the spring, held them out explanatorily. The sun flashed down on the steel that bound them. "I'm Penrith Garrett," he replied meekly. "I didn't figure anybody bunked here. Saw this water and just had to have it to get these damn irons off." The moment Garrett stood up, the gun in the other's fist was rammed into his ribs. It shoved him back a step. The red-haired one's tiny, piercing eyes were glued to the handcuffs, the empty holsters on the lean thighs. "Don't try to get funny with Jack Smith," he snapped. "This cocky yarn about getting handcuffs off with water. Think I believe that? What do you really want?" Penrith Garrett seemed to cringe back. "Just like I said, Smith. Some cold water to get these wristbands off. I've done it more than once." He shot a worried glance along his back trail leading out of the gully. "But I guess I ain't got time now. I only had a couple of spare minutes. You used them all up. I gotta push along now until I can find another spot, more private. That posse is too close." A cunning, reluctant expression dawned in Smith's features. "Wait a minute, Garrett," he barked. "Get in that shanty. I'll bring up a bucket of water. Now move." Garrett instantly hesitated, glancing sharply at Smith. "And then lock me in, huh?" he chortled, some of his meekness gone. "Bounty hunter, huh? I don't know you, Smith. I'll take my chances along the trail, if I got any." Smith gave him a vicious shove toward the rock shanty and tilted his gun. "Ever hear Pete Morgan? He's the killingest and smartest outlaw that ever hit these hills. Never gets caught. And there ain't a lawman in 500 miles with guts enough to hunt him down. He sprattles 'em all out full of lead. Wall, Garrett, Pete Morgan's a friend of mine, see? Sometimes when he's on the duck, he stops in my place here for a breather." Still, the frown of concern didn't leave Penrith's lean face. "How do I know that ain't a stall? And what about the law bunch tailing me right now? Even if I could be sure of you, that ain't stopping him." Smith kept his gun level, then dipped the bucket into the spring with his free hand, brought it up brimming full. "Never mind them," he replied. "This place is like a fort, and I'll keep my eyes peeled while you work. But you're gonna show me how water shucks wrist irons, or I'll blow you apart and turn you over to your posse friends. 'Cause if it can be done, I'm passing on the dope to my friend Pete Morgan." Garrett's eyes pleaded. His lean face writhed with entreaty. "But, hell, Smith, one man can't hold off that sheriff and his men. Let me get moving." Jack Smith sneered contemptuously. "Stop mouthing, you jelly-spined rat. I'll take care of any law hombres that try to bother you. That is, if you can get them irons off like you said." And Smith laughed. The interior of the shanty was poorly lit, and as badly furnished. Setting the bucket down in front of Garrett, Smith's glance went to the fugitive's empty holsters, then to the shackled wrists. Approval shone in his eyes. "Get working, Garrett." Penrith's Garrett gulped, then stuck his hands into the cool water. For 5 minutes he kept them there, explaining in a faltering voice. "Cold water thins the blood, shrivels your hands kinda like. That's only a part of it. You gotta know how to work the knuckles of your fingers too. Just watching me will only give you an idea how it's done, 'cause it's better to have 'em on to understand the bone part. Only I won't have time to show you that, Smith." Garrett suddenly broke off, shot a terrified glance toward the open door. "What was that?" Smith gave a scornful laugh. "You're as jumpy as popcorn. Didn't hear a thing himself." Garrett gave a sigh of relief, pulled his wet wrist from the bucket of cold water. Then, carefully, and ever so painstakingly, he worked the steel band on his left wrist over the back of his hand until it reached the knuckles of his fingers and thumb. At this point, he folded his thumb into his palm. Then, with his other hand, he crushed together the knuckles of his fingers while at the same time forcing the band over them. Likewise, he freed his other hand. "Cripes. Pete Morgan can sure use an idea like that," Smith gasped. Garrett smiled wanly, then stood up. Stuffing the handcuffs into his pocket, he rubbed his wrists and headed for the door. "Wouldn't mind tying up with this gent you call Pete Morgan," he said, admiration threading his voice. "Him and me ought to be able to do pretty good together. But hell, I never get around to meeting the right hombres. Besides, I got to be hitting out of here pronto. That posse?" Smith's eyes were glowing as he caught Garrett by the arm. "Listen, Garrett, I might be able to fix it with Morgan, you know. That little trick of yours with those cuffs would do it, I think. But I'd have to know exactly how to work it, see? I mean the bone part." Garrett frowned and pulled away. "Sorry, Smith, but the hombres in that posse that's hunting me ain't gonna be waiting elsewhere for me to finish making demonstrations. I'm riding." "The hell you are," growled Smith, yanking him back into the room. "You're showing me, or I'll slap you all over these rock walls." Mollified, Garrett cast a wistful glance toward the open door. Then, pulling the wrist irons from his pocket, he threw them at Smith. "You win," he groaned. "Put them on then, and I'll show you." Smith caught them, stared blankly at Garrett. "They're still closed, locked. I can't get 'em on this way, you damn fool." "I forgot. Give 'em back. I've picked more than one lock with a horseshoe nail." As Garrett took the long nail from his vest pocket, Smith's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Say, if you can pick that lock, why in hell didn't you do that in the first place instead of soaking your wrists?" Garrett sniffed contemptuously. "How could I? When your wrists are only 2 inches apart, it's impossible to bend your fingers down so as to pick a lock, especially when the keyhole is on the side of the lock toward your body." Smith scratched his head. "I hadn't thought about that. You're right." Suddenly, Garrett jerked rigid, his eyes stabbing toward the open door. "I heard something that time, Smith. Take a look-see, will ya? Hell, man, if they find me—" He broke off the thought, seemed to finish it within his mind. Smith gave him a withering, cynical sneer. Nevertheless, he walked to the door and stood for a moment scanning the gully and the stony trail winding down to the plain. When he returned, Garrett tossed the handcuffs to him. They were open. "Damn if I can figure out how a mollycoddle like you could get in trouble," mumbled Smith as he snapped on the wrist cuffs. "Now what do I do?" Garrett pointed to the bucket of cold water on the floor. "You gotta stick your hands in there. Remember what I told you about thinning the blood so's to make your hands smaller? Wall, you're pretty big, you know." Obediently, Smith got to his knees, jammed his fleshy hands into the cool spring water. At the same moment that his manselled wrist disappeared into the bucket, Garrett calmly reached down and plucked out Smith's gun from its holster. Smith paled and cursed. Jerking his fist from the water, he glared hotly at Garrett and his own gun staring him in the face. What the hell is the idea, Garrett?" he demanded, the jangling handcuffs blending with the piercing sharpness of his voice. "Put that gun back, you little squirt, and finish telling me how to get these damn shackles off." "Here's how." And Garrett grinned triumphantly as he held up the key he had used instead of the nail when Smith had gone to the door. "Now get up on your feet, you rat." Smith's tiny pig eyes became ugly red with fierce rage. "Why, damn you, Garrett, you don't know who I am. I'm not Jack Smith. That was just a stall. I'm the gent you wanted to tie up with. The killer who never gets caught. Why, I can blast a dozen lawmen to dust with that gun any time, day or night. I'm Pete Morgan." Garrett laughed and prodded the outlaw with his own gun. "Now isn't that just dandy? I'm Jeff Chambers, the new marshal of Dusty Forks.